Welcome to Accelerate OC, the only show focused on the people leading innovation in Orange County. Join our host, Kerry Ransom, in his conversations with the trendsetters, entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders here, because it's time to Accelerate OC.
Good morning. Welcome to Accelerate OC. I'm Kerry Ransom, and along with our engineer, Paul, we are super excited to welcome my friend Dan Rodrigues here today. Before I let Dan tell us some great stories, though, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dan. I've had the pleasure of knowing him for many, many years. Dan's the founder and CEO of KAREO, which is a SaaS company here in the healthcare industry. And KAREO has continued to expand its scope of services. And, you know, I would almost call it, and I'll let Dan describe it more specifically in the way his marketing folks probably want him to here in a minute, but I call it almost medical office in the cloud, focused on independent physician practices. And he has grown this company to be the preeminent company of its kind in the country. They've got over 50,000 customers in every state, and he's now has over 600 people in the company. He's also raised a ton of money for KAREO, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about today, because obviously a key topic here on Accelerate OC is how do we continue to bring funding at all levels of companies here to Orange County, companies like Dan's. He recently added a very, very well-known entrepreneur who's a longtime friend of his to his board of directors, who many of you will recognize the name, Travis Kalanick, who was the founder of Uber. And so we may try to touch on that topic a little bit today if we have time. As I mentioned, I've known Dan for a long time. I think it's been over 10 years since we first met. Amazing journey that he's been on with KAREO. We've talked a lot about the company over the years, as well as his personal journey and growth through that. And I really want to touch on some of that today. Before KAREO, he is a serial entrepreneur. He co-founded a couple other companies. And he started his career early on in Seattle in a couple well-known tech companies of what I would characterize as the last generation. He was at both Vizio, which became part of Microsoft, and Real Networks. And he also is a fellow Bruin, so graduate of UCLA, go Bruins. Dan, he's been a cheerleader for Orange County, a big reason why I have him on. He's decided to build his company here. He's building his family here. He's got a big family, puts me to shame. He's got 5 kids, and he's had those all while building KAREO, which is remarkable. He's a busy guy. So thank you for being here today, Dan, and finding this time to spend with us here on Accelerate OC.
Yeah, you bet. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's get to the starting line. Let's talk about the starting of KAREO. How did it come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So my previous business was a software consulting company up in LA, really a little boutique software consulting business. We had about a dozen engineers. I had a co-founder with me, the other managing director, a guy named Kevin Smilak, who was the CTO of my first company, Scour. And he and I set out to build a little boutique consulting business after going so hard at our first startup. And kind of had the sort of college years that we didn't have in college. Lived in Hermosa Beach in a bachelor pad, had a office in El Segundo, and ended up building this nice little list of clients here in Southern California, really small, medium-sized businesses that had some technology need, really around custom application development. And so we took on, as part of that, a range of clients in a variety of industries. And one of the clients we took on was in the healthcare industry. And that was really how I got first introduced into healthcare. Didn't know much about healthcare. Had a client, wanted to build some software, knew how to build software. And so we took on that client. And the project started very small in scope. The client that we had actually did medical billing for physician practices. And they focused on a particular type of medical doctor called a physiatrist. And physiatrists do a lot of rounds in nursing homes and other rehab facilities. And they want us to build a little mobile device for the physician when they were doing the rounds to capture information. And so we built that software, and then from that, it became a document scanning and routing system, scheduling system, and eventually it was a full-blown claims management system to run the financial side of a medical practice. And so after a couple of years in a consulting capacity, I really started to fall in love with the opportunity. And there are really three big things around that. One is that huge market. At that time, the economy was in recession. Here's this industry, healthcare, that's famously grown by trillions of dollars.
And pretty recession-proof.
Pretty recession-proof, which is definitely a good thing at that point. Second thing was that it just seemed like there were a lot of problems to be solved in healthcare. I was the main consultant on the project, really got into the weeds of how healthcare administration works and paperwork, the rules, like all the red tape. It just seemed like it was crazy. And then the last thing was just technology that seemed pretty antiquated. Having started my career in more consumer internet, consumer software, seeing the software that was used in the healthcare industry, just felt like there was a lot of opportunity to improve. So big market, lots of problems, antiquated technology. And so I started to think about like, hey, maybe I could start a company around the product that we had built and market it to other companies. And right around that same time, actually more of a personal story, my father was diagnosed with cancer. And that was total surprise. He was super healthy, seemingly super healthy at the time, and went from being diagnosed to unfortunately passing in about 4 months. And through that experience, obviously it was a difficult personal tragedy, but I got to see every sort of touch point of the healthcare system. And then also, since my parents were divorced, I became sort of the caretaker, sort of the financial manager, and getting all the bills and the EOBs and just sort of sorting through all of that. And so, I wouldn't say that was like the primary reason that I did it, but I think with the consulting, client and kind of getting into the space and then seeing it firsthand, maybe just felt like it was a sign from the universe that maybe I should give this a shot.
Sure. Yeah. And probably after that experience, to some extent, you may have even considered going on the patient consumer side. Not that the business was good, but the pain is just so
totally
high there.
Totally. I mean, every aspect of it is just, it was, just seemed like it was really challenging.
Yeah. Well, thank you for telling that story. I think it's a great story about how you turn a professional services or consulting project into a product company. For people out there, is that something you think is in general a good way to start a company, or do you feel like it was just that light bulb of the big market? I mean, I think some of those elements are generally attractive startup spaces to be. I mean, I think I heard Stuart McClure from Silence here speak a few months ago, and he said he got into cybersecurity because he felt like, I'm going to figure out something. It's a huge market.
Yeah.
So you had a little bit clearer picture.
Yeah, no. Actually, in some ways, I started a professional services company kind of by accident. In that the first company I started was an internet company. Started right out of UCLA, more of a product company, and we had some success with that. And then I was working on a second idea in the gaming space. And then 9/11 happened. It was like the absolute wrong time to start a company, and especially one that would require venture backing. And so really I kind of took refuge by building this little boutique software consulting business, because I had, some connections, family and friends and other colleagues that I'd met previously that, had some software needs. And we said, well, we could take on a project here and there. And then all of a sudden we, kind of created the services business. But it's a great way to just get exposed to a lot of different industries and a lot of different opportunities, because you just don't know where your entrepreneurial inspiration is going to come from. And so it's a nice way to earn some money, like really dig in, keep your skills sharp while you're kind of on the hunt for some opportunity that comes knocking. And that's the way that worked out for us at KAREO.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I think the thing I hear often are the people that get stuck in that professional services world for maybe too long, or agencies.
Yeah, that is hard, because you gotta be willing to take the leap.
That's right. And
the cool thing about the way we did it is we had this client, and the stars sort of aligned, because we had this client. They had big aspirations for what they wanted to do in building their own custom software, but they were on a limited budget. And so part of the way that I segued from the consulting business to Kareo is I sort of pitched, a plan to that client to, first buy back the IP that we had developed for them, sign them up as our first revenue generating customer. So we were revenue generating on day one. We could afford to hire like 4 or 5 engineers to keep building the product. And then the pitch to them was, hey, we're going to go out and find a bunch of other customers just like you and sort of amortize the cost of development over a bigger customer base. So you're going to get what you want a lot faster. And then, early on, we gave them a small equity stake in the new business, and it totally worked out perfectly.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that is a huge story for people to really understand that, to your point, a lot of ways to draw that entrepreneurial inspiration. And if you can figure out how to have that first customer, have them paying you from day one, I mean, that is...
It's golden if you can find it. Yeah.
But
you gotta have the courage to jump out. Cause like that first year, while we were generating revenue, all that revenue was going into
You're not paying yourself.
Employees. So I wasn't paying myself for probably 18 months. And obviously that was different than, having a good stable of clients as a consulting business and having regular income coming in.
Yeah. That is often the big leap that people have to make. So yeah, great, detailed stories. I know the audience is going to greatly appreciate. So thank you for that. So you have this first customer sometimes, and I've seen this where that first customer is almost the wrong indicator of a market, right? It could lead you down this pathway, and obviously that hasn't happened with Kareo. You've been really smart about it. But what was the moment where you thought, oh, I've really got something here? Was it that first customer, or was it sometime a bit later?
Well, I would say, first of all, like the risk that you're talking about, like, having one customer kind of lead you the wrong direction. We certainly had our fair share of that early on. At Kareo, we took on, initially we were selling into these medical billing companies as sort of an indirect path to get to physician practices. And we took on some early clients that had us, kind of chasing down rabbit holes that turned out were not representative of what the market, in general needed. And so we definitely had some hard lessons around that, but it's all about kind of recovering from that and like understanding it and like moving on. But yeah, I would say in terms of like the moment, when kind of we thought, okay, things are really working. The interesting thing is that for us, I don't know that there was like a single moment in time where like, okay, we got this. It was more sort of building momentum over kind of a series of those types of moments. I mean, obviously the first one was, wow, okay, we negotiated this really creative deal to get the business started, and we were revenue generating on day one. That was like, okay, that's something.
Sure.
And then, going from that, spending about 9 to 12 months taking what was a very custom solution and trying to broaden the appeal to other customers, and then getting that first next customer. One could say like real customer, like your first true real customer, besides that founding customer. That was a huge moment. I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but after having gone through kind of the .com era and then seeing the recession afterwards, at first I thought I wasn't going to raise any capital. And meanwhile, I had some friends that I knew from kind of my first startup days that had a lot of relationships in Silicon Valley. And I went up there and just kind of talked about the idea. And first of all, like probably 80% of the VCs I talked to warned me about selling any kind of software technology into doctors. So first of all, they're like, hey, we've funded so many companies that have tried and failed at this space. Don't do it. Yeah. So there was a little bit of a cautionary tale.
Kind of like me with lawyers when I
ran that was probably like an anti moment. But then that was closely followed by I got introduced to an early investor in Kareo. His name is Halsey Miner, who was pretty well known back in like the early sort of internet 1.0 days. He started CNET and supplied the software that became the Vignette content management system. And then he was also a huge investor in Salesforce.com before they went public, made a ton of money off that. And, I sat down with him and we talked a little bit about the idea. It's like, hey, it's I think even then it wasn't cloud, and it was like on-demand software.
Sure.
So it was like on-demand software for healthcare. It was like, wow, okay, that's a big idea. that's a huge market.
Mm-hmm.
And, got, essentially, I guess it would be called a seed round to, today at that time it was a Series A
Mm-hmm.
on very entrepreneurial, favorable terms, which I thought, okay, somebody else believes in the idea. That's a moment.
Sure.
And then, and maybe another year or so later, we transitioned our sales model from one that was like outbound, like calling into these billing companies and really just fighting tooth and nail to get customers, to really redesigning our go-to-market around a very self-service kind of online buying process. And this was right around the time a lot of small business customers were going to Google to search for software.
Mm-hmm.
And we just got really good at, paid search, driving customers to landing pages, having all of our product information on the website and getting doctors to sign up online with a credit card without ever talking to a salesperson. And so that was like a really cool moment too. It was like, wow, okay, a doctor would re-engineer their entire office after just going to a website and learning about a product and dropping their credit card and signing up for it. I was like, okay, we might be onto something here.
Yeah, that's a big, when somebody's almost defying what anybody else in the market believes they were willing to do.
Yeah.
That's a
And
big
I also have a funny
deal.
story about that. There's a local VC who will remain nameless that I went and pitched the idea. And let's just say that the VC basically said, hey, I just don't believe, doctors are going to be, buying their software on the internet. And this wasn't that long ago. This
Mm-hmm.
was like maybe, I don't know, 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what are you talking about? Like everything is going to be bought on the internet. So that was a funny story.
That's right. But yet there's still, I had a conversation as recently as yesterday
Okay.
about a company that shall remain nameless who believes that they aren't losing share right now to businesses buying products on Amazon. They think there's no way a business owner is going to go and buy something for their business on Amazon.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
somehow we don't
Could
always
be
wanna,
wrong. Could be wrong about that one.
Yeah, exactly. So I think those are key lessons as an entrepreneur, that at times you're going to see things that other people won't, and
Yeah.
those biases that we all carry can be really, really powerful to
Totally.
resisting change. So great story. I think the stories are super helpful. So thank you. So you've built it here in Orange County. I know you've expanded into some other places. We've talked about that over the years, but I feel like you're all in on Orange County. Let's talk first about, what do you feel like has worked well being here in Orange
Yep.
County?
Well, look, what's worked? Well, obviously there's a lot that's worked for us to get to where we are today.
Absolutely.
So I think while we can certainly wade into some of the challenges in Orange County, there's definitely a lot to be said about Orange County. And you look, the reason why I started the business here, probably the same reason that a lot of entrepreneurs do, is that they grow up here and they just think it's such a great place to live. And wow, if you could really build a company here that's successful and be able to live in this wonderful place, like how fantastic would that be?
Absolutely.
And for me, a little bit of a side tangent, but I think I shared this story with you once. But when I was growing up here and going through high school, my mom was basically had 2 jobs, and she was moonlighting as a desktop publisher, and she helped a couple of Orange County companies, like the founder or kitchen table, like get their business started. One was the Upper Deck baseball card company. Another one was a company called Hooked on Phonics. That was a popular reading program. And both of those companies went from like nothing to 500 employees in a couple of years. And for me as an entrepreneur, that was like a big source of inspiration.
Absolutely.
Like, wow, you could really do that. And that happened here in Orange County. So it's just like, well, why couldn't you do it? Right. And so for me, I think there's a lot of things that have worked. First of all, there's great talent here. I think that's, maybe not as well understood or recognized, but there are awesome people in Orange County that have a really diverse background and mix of skills. And even where you need to go deep, like there's some folks that can go deep, like especially around technology and product roles. So that's been awesome for us. Look, it's a huge geo. It's a huge market for us. We've got lots of small business customers, lots of doctors. And so for us, as we were building our product, there's tons of doctors' offices to go to in Orange County, needless to say, right? And that helped a lot because, like, just getting in front of customers, spending time, having them walk through the product, and, like, in that sort of development phase of the business. That was huge. We ultimately, we have raised a lot of capital. And while there are certainly challenges to being an Orange County company and attracting the capital as easily as, let's say, if you were in Silicon Valley or Seattle or New York or Boston, it's possible. It's absolutely possible. And we've obviously had a lot of success with that. So and then the last thing, I mean, it's just such a great place to live and work, and I think that's a huge draw, and something that we're still benefiting from. So there's a lot that is working. We can talk about the things that need to be improved and how do we build the technology and the startup community here. But look, if there's a will, there's a way.
Sure.
And I think the Kareo story, among other stories here in Orange County, has shown that you really can do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And so let's switch gears for a second. What are you, as you've looked at sort of, building it here, you talk about, capital probably not quite as easy. Are there any other challenges that you see in being in Orange County from things you just like to highlight that is really more toward what should we be as a community thinking about to make it easier for the next generation of entrepreneurs?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No. So I think as I was building Kareo, I think that certainly there were a lot of challenges, and there's just to be honest with you, there's just a lot of challenges for starting a business wherever
Period.
you're located.
Yes.
I was looking at a stat the other day, and it's like the number of companies that get to 100 million in revenue from startup. It's like one in 3,000 companies or something like that. So it's just like, in some ways, like to be an entrepreneur is like an economically irrational decision to begin with. So you're going to face tons of challenges wherever you are. I think in Orange County, some of the challenges we faced early on was capital raising, and I think if I were to put a finer point on it, we started really trying to find capital from the local kind of private capital market, and I think that we ran into some challenges with that just because we were talking before the show. It's just it's a little bit different than some other sort of more established venture communities, in that there's probably a little bit less risk taking, wanting a lot more proof points. There's certainly, there were a lot of, potential sources that we talked to, but that weren't really actively investing a ton. And so you start to kind of chase some of those opportunities. Maybe they're not real opportunities. And I think, fortunately or unfortunately, we had to kind of go outside of Orange County to raise capital and focus on, more Bay Area or East Coast investors. I think once we, kind of made that decision and pivot, we definitely saw a lot of opportunities and were able to raise the capital that we needed on the terms that we needed to do it. But, at least at the time that we did a lot of capital raising, we kind of had to go outside of Orange County.
Sure.
But there definitely is a growing number of venture firms that, certainly there's still a lot that's going into Silicon Valley and some of the tier one markets, but there's also a growing number of venture firms that realize that those markets are getting very competitive and it costs a lot to build a company there. And they're looking at second tier markets. And I think, Orange County is one of a collection of cities that have a lot of the core ingredients that should be successful with that kind of, that transition that's happening in the capital community. The other challenge that we've had is, and this has been more in the last 3 or 4 years, is as the company has grown and gotten to scale, more senior executive talent. So, basically half of my executive team, I've had to end up recruiting from outside of Orange County and bringing them into Orange County. In an ideal world, we would have a strong enough talent ecosystem with experience at that later stage to just find everyone locally, because certainly there are advantages to having people with deep roots in Orange County and are already here. So that would be another challenge. And then maybe the last is, product.
Now they're here, so
now
they're probably not going
they're
to
now,
want to go anywhere.
well, hopefully we can,
exactly.
they can start to plant those roots.
That's right.
And then the last one maybe is just, it's obvious, but as a software company, the core of it is product, UX, engineering talent. And I would say there's a lot of it here, but you can always have more.
Okay.
And I would say, what I've seen different like now than maybe 10 years ago. 10 years ago, like you couldn't find them. Now I think there's a much more stronger talent pool But now you also have some companies like KAREO that have kind of reaching scale and like actually starting to suck in a lot of talent. So the ones that are really good, it's probably a little bit more competitive today than maybe it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think to your point, we still have the ingredients. We have all the advantages if we can connect these pieces together.
Absolutely.
But capital continues to still be the one that most folks like you will hold out from especially the early stages, because once you get going, you start to get some momentum and some reputation. The capital will find you, or you can find it wherever it is. And my great hope, obviously, is that we get more local capital here, investing in local companies here, and we create a little bit of that reinvestment effect that you see happening in so many other markets.
Yeah, totally.
So let's go a little bit more under the hood. You've raised a lot of capital now for KAREO. How have you gotten comfortable with fundraising? Because this is a topic a lot of entrepreneurs talk to me about. Refining their pitch, figuring out who to talk to. You're a great storyteller, but what is it that has, what have you done to really get more comfortable with fundraising?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's important to always have a certain level of discomfort with raising capital, because
I think that's a good
for
point.
a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
But it is sort of a means to an end. I think for KAREO, I mean, every business is a bit different and should obviously tailor their financing strategy to the business and the opportunity. I think for us, we thought, it's a huge market, it's a big idea. This could be a really big company, and we wanted to scale fast. And we thought the key to doing that was, obviously there's a lot of things you do in the business, but certainly having the capital to drive that growth, particularly once you kind of find, initial product market fit, and there's a market out there and you want to go after it. For us, I think raising capital helped us really start to pull ahead of some of our early competitors. But I will say that there's obviously a downside, right, to raising capital. I think the key is just is really, and it's hard to do, but is forcing yourself to like maintain that discipline. I mean, there's definitely been a few more than a couple near-death experiences for KAREO in the early days where we almost ran out of money, and it's such a focusing, set of constraints and pressure that where you kind of do your best work and you're most productive. It doesn't feel like it at the time. It feels like it's like miserable, and if like you could only just have a bunch of money in your bank account, all of your problems will be solved. But the truth is that all of your problems aren't solved by that. It just creates, some of them are solved, but it creates some new problems. And so I think if anything that I've learned from the capital raising is just, fighting the temptation to let that kind of discipline sort of wane a bit, and really thinking carefully about how you're deploying your capital as you're growing your business.
That's a great lesson to share. Thank you for that. So you made at one point several acquisitions in the company, which is somewhat a function of the capital that you had, and somewhat a function of even the expansion of your vision and the business. What have you learned from that phase that you would take with you later into KAREO, or would share with others? Yeah.
So KAREO, we've made essentially two product type acquisitions. One was like a technology asset purchase. The other one was actually like buying a small startup. And then we also made a number of acquisitions around the services side of our business. And I would say that the acquisitions were an important part of our strategy. It did help us expand our product line and grow the company more quickly than we would have done without the acquisitions. But I will say that it, having gone through it now a few times, like integrating and realizing the value of an acquisition is a hell of a lot harder than it looks. It really is. And I think that, in some ways it was a little bit of the beginner's mindset. Like we didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into, and we're just like, through caution in the wind, let's do this, But I think that, making it work and realizing the value is really challenging. And a lot of it comes down to just being realistic about what it is that you're buying. The other thing is that the people side is everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it all comes down to the people. And if the situation with the principals and some of the other key people that you're bringing over in acquisition are not right and are not aligned, like there's nothing you can do about that. And it's really trying to, force a square peg through a round hole, and it can create a lot of problems. So I think maybe having gone through it a bit, I'm not like anti-acquisition as a means of growing. It's just I think that I've learned a lot, and I'm probably smarter now, and I'd be a bit more cautious and thoughtful both about the business case as well as, the steps for integration, and most importantly, just, the people, and giving the people a bear hug and making sure that it's going to be a successful cultural integration for the business. So those are some of the things I've learned.
That's great. It seems like to me, if you're going to do a single one, almost doesn't seem in many cases worth doing. And if you're going to do it, it's we're going to intentionally build an expertise and a cultural
and I also think that
strategy.
I think that's absolutely right. And I would say that maybe building on that point, I think that sometimes the buy case is a lot more optimistic than the build case, and that you don't necessarily have to buy into a capability or kind of new growth channel. You can build it too, and just like being really realistic about, what's involved in both, because there's certainly pros and cons to both approaches.
Sure, makes a ton of sense. So, what's your vision? You've been at this now for well over 10 years, Dan. What is the vision you have for Kareo over the next few years?
So I think I'll kind of go back to like the vision in some ways has kind of more or less remained the same since we started the business, which is, I think, a good test of a vision.
Absolutely.
But I'll share where we're at with that journey and what's happened in the market since we started the business. I think that when I started the company, the only really technology that a doctor used in their office was their billing system. And over the past 10 years, that's changed dramatically. And now doctors are taking advantage of technology in so many different ways. They're using electronic health records to manage all their patient data and how they perform, their service. They're also leveraging tools for marketing and CRM type functions in the practice. Like every aspect of the medical practice is getting automated. And I think that's a good thing, but I think that the thing that's interesting for me when we started the company is doctors have such a difficult job. There's so many things, so many distractions that get in the way of them kind of practicing medicine,
doing
taking care
what
of their
they
patients.
signed up to do.
It's crazy.
Right? Yes.
I mean, a lot of it has to do with government regulations and some of the things that come there, but a lot of it just has to do with just the utter fragmentation and complexity of the industry. And so the vision for us is like there's all these things that have gotten in the way of doctors just doing their job and like practicing medicine and giving all of us as patients like a great experience. And as the technology in medical offices expanded over the past 10 years, a lot of that's been driven by the adoption of electronic health records, which had a sort of a government mandated checklist of requirements. And unfortunately, unlike a lot of other verticals, I think software has kind of failed doctors in the healthcare industry. And it's still, if you talk to doctors, it's still like really hard for them to do their work between the technology and all the business distractions and so forth. And so we think that there's still this opportunity for software to play a really critical role in how doctors practice medicine and running a successful clinic. And we're not there yet. And so I think our vision is really to see if we can get to that, see if we can get through all of these changes that have happened in the industry and really bring forward, like you said, a kind of a medical office in the cloud that's integrated, has all the functions they need for their practice. It's really easy to use and it eliminates all the unnecessary work in a practice and ultimately makes that practice profitable and providing a great patient experience to all of us. And that's kind of the nirvana. We're not quite there yet.
I'm ready to go back to see a doctor when
yeah,
that's a reality.
And so like we want to make that real. And I think if we make that real, first of all, I think Kareo can become a big, important, valuable company, in our industry. And as we do that, there's going to be a lot of options for where we where we go with the business and how we all as stakeholders realize value from that.
That's great. Well, Dan, I would sit here probably for the next 2 hours and continue this conversation, but Paul is giving me the time sign. So one of the things that I ask all of our guests on Accelerate OC is to share a lesson or experience that they feel like they could pass along to other listeners and entrepreneurs out there. So, whether in your KAREO experience or, in your journey so far, what would you love to share with our listeners?
Yeah, you asked me that question a couple of days ago, and I've been thinking about it. And I would say for me, my lesson as an entrepreneur is really three things. And going back to where we talked about a few minutes ago, it's there's so many the odds are really stacked against you as an entrepreneur, and so that's kind of the way that I think about the lessons I've learned. Is first, you gotta love what you do.
Absolutely.
And I would say the Orange County angle is you gotta love where you do it, right? You gotta love what you do and where you do it, and that's so important because you're gonna hit so many challenges along the way that if you don't fundamentally love it and you don't enjoy the adventure and the challenge and the how scared you are, how excited you are, like you can't get through all of that. Right. So you gotta love it. Secondly, you also, and this goes back to like really the concept of a business, is like you really got to be honest with yourself about what the opportunity is. We were talking about that with some of the things that you've been working on lately, and you got to really look yourself in the mirror and say, hey, is there a big market opportunity here? And yeah, there's so many reasons why it could fail, but like, is there a fundamental like North Star that's like true and real and out there that you believe in? And if you've got those two ingredients, then it just comes down to, in my view, tenacity and resilience, because there's going to be so many times that you get knocked down. There's going to be so many things that you run up against that seem like they're impossible to overcome. And I think that a lot of companies fail, not because the business fails, but because the entrepreneur fails the business. And what I mean by that is like it's more often that the entrepreneur gives up on the business than the business is unsuccessful. So if you just have the sheer grit and you can grind it out and overcome those challenges and bounce back from setbacks and so forth, like if you're willing to put in the time and do the work, like you can make it successful if you got those other two things. And I think that's one of the lessons I've learned, because as you know, it's been like I'm like 15 years into this and we're at a great place right now, but we've definitely had like bumps along the way, and like there's probably a half dozen times that we could have failed as a business. And I think it's just like taking a step back and just going back at the problem once again. And so those three things: you gotta love what you do, you gotta be honest about the opportunity, and you gotta have the tenacity and resilience that great entrepreneurs have.
That's amazing perspective, and and I get to share with the listeners. I can see it in your eyes, and I think that is something I've always appreciated. Is you have that grit and tenacity about you, and I appreciate our friendship and all the conversations we've had, and I'm so happy to see the great success that you've enjoyed, even though it has been it's not without its challenges, but that's every entrepreneur who's really honest, I think, is going to at some point admit that there were challenges along the way. So
I just want to quickly call you out, Carey, because I think you talked a lot about building the community here in Orange County, and I think a big part of that is having people that are connectors, that are bringing people together. And I think that you're one of the very few people here in Orange County that stand out as someone that's really working hard to create an awesome like tech environment, and just being willing to do shows like this and like connecting people and all the different events that we do. And so keep doing it, because I think that's gonna have a big impact on this community here in OC.
Well, just trying to do my small part, as you know. So Dan, thanks so much for taking us along on this ride today and really leading by example here. You're doing your part for sure to Accelerate OC. Welcome to the family.
You bet. My pleasure.
You've just listened to Accelerate OC. Join our live recordings every Tuesday morning at accelerateoc.com, or listen, like, and share anytime from your favorite podcast spot. Let's accelerate OC together.
Welcome in to another episode of the Esports Minute, presented by Esports Network. I'm Mitch Rames. We are taking a one-day break from daily esports news to preview a new podcast that just went live on the Esports Network podcast feed. Back at E3, Ubisoft shared gameplay of their newest title. A mix between roller derby and basketball, Roller Champions look to be a unique new game and, in the future, a possible esport. What makes this game so unique is that the first comparison people have is Rocket League. In the esports world, there aren't any other games like Rocket League as of right now. Roller Champions could be the second title in what could become a new genre. I talked with Ubisoft developer Stefan Drapeau about the inspirations behind the game, what makes it a solid competitive experience, and what we should call this new genre of video games. Here's Stefan on what Ubisoft is